It's the 24 hours of Le Mans week. Welcome
Whoop,
back to
whoop.
another episode of the Rain Race podcast. Again on a Thursday. Um, I was a bit busy, as it turned out, churning out that 1999 Le Mans video on Tuesday night so I could get it up in time for the 25th anniversary of that race start on Wednesday morning. So pushed it back to Thursday. That's all right. We got more on track talking to doing this episode now. After the first 2 days of official running for the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Off to my right, my fantastic co-host with the ever so fitting Le Mans lighting going on in the background. I don't know if that was intentional or what the deal is with that.
No, so it's actually so I have the Peugeot. I don't think I butchered it that time. I have the Lego Hypercar, and I got this kit for it where you add the lights into it, so it's
Ooh.
all lit up. So I think you're seeing the red tail lights of that off in the back, and
Oh.
it's really adding to the ambiance of Le Mans week. So I'm all for it.
Well, I'm because it's perfectly fitting in with the Le Mans colors, but it's also fitting in with the colors of the background on this podcast. So
That's true.
props to you on that. I don't. You said it wasn't intentional, but we'll take it.
Yeah, I'll
Um,
take any win where I can get it.
You are fresh off the Canadian Grand Prix this past weekend. Got to see some Formula One action. You also got to see some Porsche Carrera Cup over there at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. How was
Not
all that for
much.
you? Well,
Did not get to see much support series running. I think the Porsche Cup ran about 4 or 5 combined laps of racing between the two races. It was pretty wet for them, and they struggled a little bit to keep green flag racing underway. But it was a fun weekend. Actually, got to see the Formula One race was pretty solid, but also had a lot of fun checking out the Porsche Carrera Cup that was there and seeing how their support paddock is all the way off in Neverland. So no, it was a lot of fun. It's always fun to be at the racetrack, and yeah, now I'm excited for the 24 hours of Le Mans. What a transition to get into that, and one of the biggest races, if not the biggest race of the sports car calendar, if not of
yeah.
any of the calendars, to be honest.
Well, let's be real here. For this year and this era that we're in right now, the 24 Hours of Le Mans is the race I look forward to the most out of any other race in the calendar in 2000, or whatever year it is, especially last year and this year as well. Um, so yeah, I've been trying to do my part and putting up some content over the past week, leading up to the race. The offside of that is, as it turns out, I spent so much time putting some of that together that I didn't end up with a ton of notes for tonight's episode. So what I want to do is sort of keep this very open-ended and a pretty casual episode. I'm going to give some of my open thoughts about some of the things I've seen on track this week. Obviously, you'll be chiming in with your opinions as well from the limited running you have been able to see with the geo-blocking situation there in maple
Great.
syrup land. And then we'll go from there. I want to talk, before we get into the 24 Hours of Le Mans, though, we have one piece of IMSA news that we want to discuss on this show. The Watkins Glen entry list came out for next weekend's Sail in 6 Hours at the Glen. It is a maximum capacity 56 car grid for the third round of the 2024 Michelin Endurance Cup. Stu, do you want to lead us in to going over some of the additional entries that we'll be seeing next weekend at the 6 hour race in New York?
Certainly, certainly. Of course, it is. What is it? Well, this is the official kind of halfway mark of the IMSA season, which is kind of hard to believe that we're there already, and we're in for another huge grid at Watkins Glen. As you mentioned, 56 cars on the grid. Basically, this track is at capacity. I do not know where you're going to fit more cars on pit lane here. We know that this has been a hectic race the past few years for sure, and it certainly is shaping up to be no different this year. Of the 56 entries that we'll see on the grid, 11 of them will be in the GTP class. We have 13 in LMP2. That is, again, we kind of forgot about the LMP2s. They haven't been on the grid since Sebring, so it's going to be good to see them rejoin the grid, we have 11 GTD pros, and then the biggest class of them all is GTD with 21 entries. Of course, with this being a Michelin Endurance Cup event, we're going to have a bunch of the Michelin Endurance Cup only runners that are returning to the grid. So, your Risi Competizione is probably the most notable one here. They won the Rolex. They're going to be back on the GTD Pro grid. There's a bunch of others that are escaping me, but Risi is the big one that comes to my mind. So we're back on the grid for IMSA with the full running of cars, and we're in for another good weekend at Watkins Glen.
Yeah, we'll have the Iron Lynx there as well. Iron Dames and GTD. We'll
Yes,
have
of
the
course.
Lamborghini Hypercar or GTP. See, I keep saying Hypercar. I'm too in Le Mans mode right now. The GTP car, as we'll say for IMSA, making its second race in the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship this year. With only a two-car driver lineup, Romain Grosjean will be over at the Laguna Seca race for IndyCar. But in general, I think most teams are just sticking with that two-car lineup for the 6-hour race anyways, so not really a big deal for Iron Lynx on that front.
Interesting to note here, there are a couple of GTP cars that are listed with 3-driver lineups. The 31 is one of them. We know that had Tom Blomqvist not been relieved of duties in IndyCar, he would have a conflict for this weekend. But I'm interested. I haven't seen any confirmation on whether he is actually going to be in the car for this race. If they are going to run with that 3-driver lineup, or if this is just an entry mistake. But
let's be honest. His schedule is a bit more free than it was a couple of weeks ago when we last talked.
Yes, and I certainly wish that we would be watching him and talking about him this weekend as well.
Yeah, definitely. But losing that full season IndyCar ride that he had with Meyer Shank Racing, officially, we discussed this in the last episode, still very much part of the Meyer Shank Racing family. It's, I guess, heavily rumored at this point that Shank will be back on the grid next season with an ARX again, sort of that reuniting of a soured relationship from last season. But I would expect that we might be able to see him at Watkins Glen with how free his schedule probably is at this current point in time. We'll be discussing Watkins Glen more next week. We'll do an official preview after we recap all 24 hours of Le Mans. I will say right now, you heard it here first, that I have sort of decided maybe I could go to the 6 hours at the Glen after realizing that there are still some hotels open in that area, which is very rare for Watkins Glen.
There you go.
So we'll see. Maybe next weekend I'll have a better idea of, or not next weekend because that's the race, but next week's episode I'll have a better idea on whether or not I'm going to make that trek out to New York to join you there.
Love it.
So switching back over across the pond to France, some of the news that has come out of the 24 hours of Le Mans since we last had an episode. I think the big notable one here is another driver replacement, and a major one at that, with Jose Maria Lopez stepping in for Mike Conway in the number 7 Toyota. Both of them were cycling together when Conway ended up having a pretty nasty accident on that bike. Suffered a rib and collarbone fractures. Now, Jose Maria Lopez, obviously no stranger to the Toyota Gazoo Racing lineup and to the Toyota GR010 Hypercar. He previously raced for the number 7 team at Le Mans since 2018. He made his Le Mans debut with Toyota back in 2017 when they were in the LMP1 TS050. And he has a Le Mans win with Toyota back in 2021 in the GR010 Hypercar. As a result of that, though, Jose Maria Lopez leaving his full season ride in the number 87 Lexus. So stepping up to that program will be Jack Hawksworth from the Vassar Sullivan IMSA program, replacing him at Akotis ASP. Pretty good signing there, I would have to say. The Lexus IMSA program has been pretty much a 180 of what we've seen from the Akotis program in the World Endurance Championship this season, where between both cars, the Akotis Lexus program only has one single point in the championship. And over on the IMSA front, they're not the current points leaders, I believe, in GTD Pro,
Rexy.
nor GTD, but but certainly in the hunt as they usually are. So be interested to see how Jose Maria Lopez fits into that lineup. Like I said, I don't think it's going to be a huge transition for him with the amount of experience he's had in that car. And so far this week, the number 7 car has looked a little bit off the pace from its sister number 8 Toyota, but Toyota Gazoo Racing, they're always going to be in the hunt at Le Mans, and we'll get into that a little bit later when we go over our predictions. Other thing I've noticed throughout this week, except for today in the Hyperpole qualifying session, is the uptick in pace that we've seen from the cars at Le Mans this year. Both the Hypercars and the LMGT3 cars, quite frankly, running a little bit quicker than I expected. All of the Hypercars are running lighter than they were last year at the 24 hours, albeit most of them are running a little bit less power as well to sort of offset that. But in addition to the cars perhaps being a little bit quicker, there also was a resurfacing done over the last off-season on a 1.9 kilometer stretch of track between Mulsanne Corner and Arnage. If you happen to notice on the broadcast that the pavement there is a little bit darker than the rest of the track, just know that was done. There's going to be a little bit more grip going into the high-speed Indianapolis kink, and then just going through the sweeping left-hander up to Arnage, and then perhaps a little bit better traction off the Mulsanne Corner as well, although I don't know officially where that pavement actually started, so maybe they don't have that advantage right out of Mulsanne Corner. Today in the Hyperpole session, though, the cars were, I guess, slower than I expected, certainly. What we saw yesterday in the qualifying session were cars that were over a second faster than we had in the initial qualifying session last year. I predicted that the Hyperpole pole position would be somewhere around a low to mid 322. The pole we ended up seeing out of the number 6 Porsche today was, I believe it was a 324.6. Couple of reasons for that. Number one, mainly being the track was very cool this year for a couple of reasons. Number one, the Hyperpole session ran later than it was scheduled to after a crash in the Michelin Le Mans Cup featuring one of the LMP3 cars. Thankfully, the driver was okay, but they had to replace a pretty significant section of the Armco barriers, and it just delayed the start of the Hyperpole session by, I think, about 30 minutes. And then also, it's just been very cool at Le Mans this week in general. I've been keeping an eye on the forecast, especially for the race this weekend, but I've noticed lows overnight we're down into the 40s earlier in the week. It seems like for the race, it's going to be a high of around 60-something, lows in the 50s at night, a lot cooler than we had last year. And then adding on to that also, there was just a little bit of rain, just a little drizzle, I think, going on a little before or around the time the cars went on track for that Hyperpole session. So probably not a ton of raw grip on the track. And we noticed that especially with Kevin Escher's pole lap sliding, basically drifting around the Ford chicanes. I don't know if you got a chance to see that pole lap yet, Stu.
I think I heard the radio, the in-car commentary, or the in-car radio, and I believe I heard that, you know, they said that the lap was lost, and his engineer just told him to hammer down and finish the lap out. I've only been able to see, unfortunately, whatever the WEC has put up on their YouTube channel. I was not able to watch it live on various streams. So yeah, but I'm pretty sure I saw that in that highlight video.
Yep. This is a safe space, by the way, if you want to rant about the the lack of being able to view the qualifying session, but I'll leave that up to you. But yeah, a phenomenal pole lap today from Kevin Estre. And I'd say a little bit unexpected as well. I'll have a full sort of recap video. When I say full, it's like 4.5 minutes. It's not too long of the Hyperpole session going up after this podcast. But I would say going into the session, a lot of people this week were saying, oh, Porsche are the favorites. Porsche. You want to talk about comments I've read on YouTube the past week. Go peek at my balance of performance analysis video.
Oh,
And
yeah, that's gonna open up a can of worms
that's
for sure.
I knew it was going to do something, but man, the amount of people who declared Porsche the winner before the race had even before they'd even hit the ground at the test day, let alone go on track for any qualifying or race session. If you paid attention to that, you might be swayed to think that Porsche would have had all three factory cars in the Hyperpole shootout. They would have had a couple of the customer cars in there as well. Really, we only saw two cars advance to the Hyperpole session, and to be honest with you, if it wasn't for Kobayashi spinning at the exit of the Porsche curves yesterday, I really think it would have only been one of them, with Callum Ilott and the number 12 Jota threatening to bump out the number 6 car yesterday in the final couple of minutes. Only two cars, though, from Porsche advancing to that Hyperpole session in Hypercar.
and, and even with that, like even in the all the sessions that we've seen so far this week, the times have been close. It hasn't been one car that's been dominating all of them. We've seen a good mix of different manufacturers and manufacturers that we don't necessarily always see at the front up until this point in the season, getting showing some good pace.
Look, you should take it from me, okay? I don't think since we started doing predictions on this podcast, I don't think a single one of my prototype predictions has ever been correct. But nonetheless, I have no idea going into this race who's really a favorite. There are certainly manufacturers that are struggling more than some others, but I can't think of a single manufacturer right now that I would confidently say, yeah, they're probably going to win this race going into it. Last year, I could have pretty confidently told you, yeah, Ferrari and Toyota are the two strong cars. They were strongest in all the practice sessions last year. Ferrari obviously strong in qualifying last year as well. This year, it really seems like an open deck of cards. I can't pinpoint one specific manufacturer and say, yeah, they're going to have the advantage the entire race, hands down. As long as they are reliable for the entire 24 hours, you're going to see them on the top step of the podium.
Yeah, it's been a treat to watch. I'm just looking at right now the times that we've seen from the different cars, throughout all of the sessions so far. And we have Cadillac, Porsche, Ferrari, and Alpine all have broke into at least the 324s, and that was before Hyperpole today. We're seeing we're seeing cars that we don't normally see running right up with the best of them. So it's a complete toss up as to who's going to be the favorite in this race in Hypercar, and it's going to lead to a great race, I think, this weekend. It is going to be a true test of endurance and which cars can avoid, whether it's incidents on track or mechanical issues. It's like you said, last year you could see Toyota and Ferrari at this point in the week. Really, they had separated themselves from the pack by a pretty significant margin. This year, it is not that way. It is, you could see virtually any of these manufacturers pulling out a win, maybe with the exception of a couple that, as you mentioned, have struggled a bit.
Yeah. So I don't want to spend this entire time talking just about qualifying, though I think it's also important to look at the pace we've seen in the free practice sessions. I have pulled up the results of all 4 of the free practice sessions, 2 from yesterday and 2 from today. The one constant I've noticed throughout all of those sessions is the performance that the number 8 Toyota has. And here's a little hint. I think that's going to reflect in my prediction later on. But they didn't really seem to be a strong car in qualifying. They have seemed, though, to have sort of that race car behind them. So I'm a bit interested to see. They'll be starting, I believe, trying to think with the penalty from the number 2 Cadillac and then everything else. They should be starting 8th in the race. I'm sorry, in 11th in the race. But like I said, they've been top of the timesheets in 3 of the practice sessions. So I'm looking at them as definitely, I don't want to say outside contender because I think they're one of the main contenders that people should keep their eyes on. Um, but then, of course, you have Porsche as well that everybody has been keeping their eyes on this week. BMW, I think, has been perhaps the biggest surprise of this week.
Yeah.
Um, you look at the new manufacturers going into the race. I personally thought that Alpine would be the strongest of the new ones. And credit to them, they are certainly pretty strong this week. They had the best qualifying result of the season today with the 35 car. But BMW in particular, strong off the bat in free practice one, finishing third in that session. And then they go on to the qualifying session yesterday where they determined the grid for the field and then the top 8 from each class advanced to Hyperpole. And they were top of the session there. I mean, Dries Vanthoor really didn't take much time to sort of show how serious BMW is on their debut here at Le Mans.
Yeah, it's been an impressive showing for them, and honestly, it wasn't something that I had could see coming. You mentioned Alpine and Alpine. I don't think it's as big of a shock for me personally as BMW is jumping up, and especially I didn't think BMW had the pace to top that first qualifying session
Yep.
session heading into Hyperpole.
Right. I also want to look, though, at some of the surprises we've had in LMGT3 before I get too carried away with Hypercar. Because, boy, were there surprises in LMGT3 as well. I talked about 10 minutes ago about how heavily Lexus has struggled in the World Endurance Championship this year. Again, one single point across both cars in the championship right now. Which, if you're not keeping track, means the best place finish of 10th for the entire season of the first 3 races. Right out the gate, though, in the first free practice session, the number 87 car, a Kodas ASP Lexus, topped the timesheets not just by a little bit, but by 9/10, almost a full second ahead of the second place car, which I think is a surprise in its own right. The number 70 Inception Racing McLaren, a car you'll be pretty familiar with, coming over from IMSA. And then the other McLaren, or one of the other McLarens, the number 59 United Autosport car, coming up third in that first free practice session as well. I'll talk about a Kodas here. I already said they were impressive to me. I wasn't quite expecting them to have that much pace here at Le Mans. But the big surprise out of qualifying really was that Inception Racing McLaren. They ended up getting the pole for the LMGT3 class today. Brendan Arib was at the wheel of the car in that Hyperpole session. And for a team that has never run at Le Mans before, they've just hit the ground running here.
Yeah, it's been impressive to watch, and they're going to have support, of course, there from a team that has run at Le Mans and runs in
Yep.
Europe more frequently. But as you said, this driver lineup, certainly Brandon, I don't believe has ever run at this track. This isn't a car that runs full time in the WEC either. Obviously, this is the invitation car from IMSA. So to be able to see them, catch on so quickly has been impressive. And I think there's been a number of sort of surprises as you look further down. You don't even have to look that far down the running order here in the LMGT3 class. It's been incredibly close. We talked about it with Hypercar. It's shaping up to be very, very similar in LMGT3, where it is just a mishmash of the teams that we normally expect see racing at the front for those wins, for those poles that we've seen so far this season. We have some of the new cars. We have some of the invitation cars. We have some of those new cars. Ford Mustang has actually run the fastest lap around here this week, a 3:55.2 from the number 77 Proton. You're seeing the Corvette run well here as well. Aston Martin. I'm looking at the timing sheets here, and so far, all of the laps that have been run so far this week, the top 7 lap times are all from 7 different manufacturers. So it just goes to show that virtually every single one of these manufacturers has good pace, and BMW is not up in this list either. Like BMW is not even in the top 7, and we know that they're going to show up and they're going to have good pace here in the race. Like, we're looking at another class that is just a complete toss up in the air, and that's going to be so much fun for us to watch through the weekend and through the race. And it is great to see you're especially coming off of some of the dialogue that we had last year around some of that 3-letter word BOP. And really at this point, it looks like that is not really a concern that's even popping into my head this weekend. It looks like there are so many cars that have the pace to be able to contend for the win. And I think we're going to see some incredible racing as a result.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple things I want to discuss there. BMW, I think, has been, alongside Ferrari, the biggest surprise to me with the lack of pace that they've had. Ferrari, they have the most number of cars in the LMGT3 class at Le Mans this year. But BMW coming in, Team WRT, with the strength they've showed in the first few races of the season. Vincent Voss told one of the media outlets, I'm trying to remember who it was, if it was Sports Car 365 or Daily Sports Car or somebody else. I'm sorry, I can't remember. I will try to find the quote though and link it if I can. Was just saying he was really disappointed with the lack of pace that they had in the LMGT3 classes here. It's almost as if they sort of have a level right here where they say, okay, you can give more pace to the prototypes or you can give more pace to the GT cars, because at the opening races this season we've really seen the GT cars being very competitive, but the hypercars have sort of been mid to back of the pack cars for the most part. And now all of a sudden we're here at Le Mans. 15 BMW tops the timesheets in qualifying yesterday for hypercar, and the Team WRT M4s are struggling quite a bit. You also mentioned the 7 different manufacturers that we have in the top 7 lap times. 5 different manufacturers starting in the top 5 in the LMGT3 class as well. You talk about how strong Ford has been as well. The big question to me is going to become, for this class, none of these cars have run at Le Mans before in the 24 hours. They've raced, some of them have raced in the Michelin Le Mans Cup race in the GT3 class there, but none of them have raced the full 24 hours. Obviously, reliability is going to be the biggest question that comes into the room here. We sort of got a preview of the reliability that some of those cars have. Of course, being a GT3 formula, this is far from the only 24-hour race that most of those cars run throughout the year. We saw most, if not all of them, I think, running at the Rolex 24 back in January. We saw some of them running in the Nürburgring 24 that was not quite 24.
The Nürburgring 8.
A couple of weeks ago. 8. But then also just running at Sebring, running in the Spa 24, the Bathurst 12-hour. A lot of these cars have proven themselves at this point. And then you have some of these new cars like the Mustang GT3. The Corvette is still a new car that recently has looked like it's starting to show a lot more potential, both internationally and stateside. But again, for a 24-hour race on a track where that car's never run a 24-hour race before, that's going to be the ultimate question in that class for me.
Yeah, and another one of the new cars, we see a comment on it here from Flame Runner, and the Fords being strong is impressive. It certainly is. I didn't think coming into this race, I was certainly not expecting Ford to be up near the top of the running order. It seems like they've recently ironed out some of the reliability issues that they've had with that car. We've talked about it a lot and joked about it a lot with that rear trunk lid. But maybe they're starting to really extract some of the speed out of that car now. And could this race be a coming out party for that Ford Mustang? I mean, if it is, then they're picking a heck of a race to have everything, start to be on the up for them. So there's so many storylines to follow in this year's race. There's always a ton of storylines to follow, but when things are this close, it's going to be really hard to stay on top of everything that's going on in the race. I think.
Well, may I draw your attention to a time that was, oh boy, this was 8 years ago now. Are we really going to say 2016 was 8 years
Oh
ago?
man.
When Ford had another GT car that they were starting out with that season that I think struggled almost just as heavily at the beginning. It certainly didn't have a great debut at the Rolex 24. Granted, they had that win at Laguna Seca in IMSA for that debut win before Le Mans that year. And I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding that car at Le Mans in 2016, but one thing that they were at that race for the most part was reliable. And it just goes to show you how unpredictable this race can be, where you can't necessarily look at how a car fared up in the Rolex 24 back in January and think that's going to be a similar story to what we see at Le Mans. So who knows? Crazier things I think have happened than a Ford potentially being on the podium or maybe potentially even going for the win this weekend. It's just going to be one of those storylines we have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and we see these races, these long endurance races that, we could say reliability is of course a huge component of this, but we see the term, 24-hour sprint race get thrown around a lot more. And you can't rely as much on reliability issues to be a huge factor in this, as much as they could be in the past. Again, I don't want to downplay the reliability of these cars in a 24-hour race, but it really does mean that, you can't just putter around the track anymore and count on your reliability to have a chance at the end of this. You do have to go full out, and it is going to be a real, true, proper test of all of these cars that are established on the grid, and then some of these new ones. So, we're seeing some more comments on the reliability of some of these cars, but man, I feel like I sound like a broken record, but it's going to be I'm really excited for this race.
Yeah. Well, one of those comments that you sort of hinted at there was over under on how fast the McLaren breaks down. And you know what? I think the McLaren is a pretty seasoned GT3 car at this point. And if that car itself is not that seasoned, the engine in that car certainly is. Running in worldwide competition for over a decade now. I mean, is that based off the same engine that they had in the MP412C GT3 car? When did that car start racing? 2011, 2012? I think it's definitely the same engine that it had in the 650S GT3.
Well, at the very least, this is an Evo spec car, right? So it's had at least that first generation that it's been in. But you're right, it's it has been put through the paces. That being said, though, I mean, we have seen reliability issues with the McLarens this year as well. I don't know if I ever saw what exactly was plaguing FAF and Inception at the Rolex earlier this year. But over under on how fast the McLaren breaks down could be something to keep an eye on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I said 5 minutes ago or less than that. You can't necessarily look at what we saw at Daytona and Sebring and think it's going to immediately translate over to Le Mans. So we'll see. I'm not going to give you an over-under on that because I'm not too sure right now.
I don't think you'd want to trust based on our predictions
that
we've had this year. I don't think we're going to give you the right answer on it anyways.
Yep. Some people are also mentioning the newer prototypes. This will be, for some of those cars, their first 24-hour race period. For Alpine, Peugeot, Asada Fraschini, Lamborghini. Didn't run the Rolex 24. So this will be their first 24-hour race period. And I think Sebring is a pretty good reliability test for Lamborghini. I've been impressed for the most part this season on how reliable that car has been, knock on wood. Their perfect streak of having no reliability issues is over. They did have issues in the WEC a couple of times, but I wouldn't necessarily look at them and say, oh, they're in trouble. They're not going to make it past hour 8, or because it's so uncertain. They've proved me wrong on multiple occasions already this season, to the point where I had like a recurring segment on this podcast talking about, well, it's another weekend the Lamborghini didn't break down, so we'll see. But yeah, you have a good point there on how many of those cars will be running a 24-hour race for the first time.
An interesting.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say an interesting comment here from Sam asking, how does the weather look for the race? That could certainly play a factor. You mentioned earlier just how sort of chilly that it has been in Le Mans for so far this week. Looking at the weather forecast, I'm getting this from the Racecast Weather Twitter account, and they're predicting 50% chance of showers on Friday, a 70% chance on Saturday, and then a further 70% chance on Sunday. Based on what I've heard, it sounds like more scattered showers, but it does sound like there's a system that could be moving in and playing a factor there. And then temperature wise, 65, 66 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 18, 19 degrees Celsius. So we could be seeing that's not cold, but it is a little bit chilly. But definitely, if we see some rain, that could play a role.
Chilly for summer standards over in France. I'll say last year it definitely wasn't that cool while I was over there. I wouldn't have minded a race with a high in the 60s, to be quite honest with you. Not getting especially cold at night either, which is the big thing at Daytona, is if it's not too hot during the day, it's way too cold at night. So I guess they're enjoying the luxury of a low of 55 Fahrenheit from what I'm seeing. Yeah, you beat me to the punch there. I tried to pull up the weather on my side as well. It's quite ironic that it showed up in my recent searches before weather for my local town. Just shows you how much I've been looking at it this week. Yeah, of course. I don't care what the temperature is going to be at home this weekend. I'm going to be inside. I'm going to be watching the TV. I don't care if it's raining. But no, what I'm seeing on Weather Underground is less chance of rain on Saturday than you were saying, around maybe a 25% chance at the max on Saturday. But then as soon as it ticks over into Sunday, it looks like that's jumping up to above 50%, jumping up near 75% in the early morning hours on Sunday. And it could be continuing through the end of the race at 4 p.m. local. So I'm interested to see what that looks like as well. We haven't had a race end in the rain at Le Mans since, it's been a while, 2013. I know the end of the race, or near the end of the race, there was a sudden downpour that caught out one of the Toyotas. But it's been certainly a while since we've had a race end under rain. Looking through a couple more of the chats here. After what happened at the Nürburgring, I hope the fog doesn't come into play. Yeah, generally speaking, that's a big Nürburgring issue that fortunately doesn't usually spill over into other races. I have sat through a couple of red flags for fog at the Rolex 24 years ago. It seems like that hasn't happened in like 15 years now.
That makes sense. It's on the coast. You can, because I was going to ask you if that is a concern at Le Mans, because you can get random fog that moves through, and there's not much that you can do about it. But yeah, the Nürburgring, it definitely seems much more prone to that, being in that sort of very hilly region, and then just a characteristic of the region more so than I think Le Mans is.
Yeah, that has happened to the Nürburgring multiple times in the last 10 years or so since I've started becoming invested in that race. And at Le Mans, I don't know the last time there was proper fog at Le Mans, but I do know that in the 101-year history of the race now, or I guess the past 100 years, because we haven't had the 101st year run yet, there has never been a red flag in the race. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed that we don't change that statistic this year,
Mm.
whether that be from a crash that's too significant that they have to red flag the race, or just weather related that they would have to red flag it. But the trends from the past 100 years are on our side, so
We
I'm
should not
hoping.
have even talked about that at all.
Yeah. Um, do not go on WEC Twitter right now. Worst mistake of my life. You know that this is what happens though. This is I don't want to turn this episode into another BOP rant. We had our first
Yeah.
episode that I did with you was an entire episode with me airing my grievances with the negatives that BOP brings to the series, and ultimately those grievances get aired a lot more during the 24 hours of Le Mans than any other World Endurance Championship race, because you have a let's look at this from an outsider's perspective. Okay, if you're coming in from Formula One, I think a lot of people are coming in to watch the 24 Hours of Le Mans. We have some IndyCar fans who are watching because there's some IndyCar representation in the race.
Mhm.
Last year, you had a lot of NASCAR fans tuning in with the Garage 56 car, which, by the way, I
True.
hope some of those fans tune in this year as well. And they were sort of shown the light last year during the 100th anniversary Le Mans. But when you get new fans come in, the first question they'll see is, well, they'll see a lot of people talking about BOP, first of all. It's very hard to not see that. And then all of a sudden you'll look at, okay, what is BOP? I don't understand what
Yeah.
this is. And then you'll start to read into it. And then from an outsider's perspective, it looks like, oh, okay, they're just taking the cars that are slower and making them faster. So they're just punishing the cars that are good. And if you don't really look at the full picture and you don't look at how they're trying to balance the cars, which I do have my own issues with, and I've expressed those in that episode we did about BOP, but I can see why it could lead to some frustrations. But at the end of the day, what you need to realize, and what I said in that video is, okay, look at the top 5 who are starting the 24 Hours of Le Mans this year. There's 4
Yeah.
different manufacturers in the top 5. I'm sitting here right now telling you that I cannot think of a clear-cut favorite for the race at all. It's a real toss-up between maybe 5 manufacturers, I think, that could have a lot of pace in that race. And my predictions aren't really worth that much because I can't predict anything when it comes to prototype racing, apparently. But I think come the race end on Sunday, I'm hoping that a lot more people appreciate the sports car racing system that we have right now. They appreciate the
Yeah.
9 different manufacturers that we have. Put the politics aside, put
Yeah.
the arguments aside, because what we have right now is a 23 car grid in the hypercar class. And if you were watching this race 2 years ago when we had 5 cars, we have more Porsche privateer cars on the grid. No, not more Porsche privateer. More Porsche 963s on the grid this year than we had hypercars, period, 2 years ago
Mm-hmm.
at this race. Look at it from that perspective, and everything starts to become a lot more exciting, I think. There's
Yeah.
my mini rant over.
Yeah. I think the bow that I just want to put on that, on what you were saying there is, last year, whether it was during Le Mans week or whether it was coming out of the race, there was lots of moaning and groaning about everything that had gone down with BOP that week. And the fact that, it's been talked about a lot since then. The one thing that I hope from this year's race, and again, the first, how many sessions do we have left? I mean, we have the race,
Warm
but
up.
okay, so we have warm up in the race.
15-minute warm up session, so not much.
Through the what is it, 6.5 hours? No, it's been more than 6.5 hours. Through all the running that we've had this week to get to this point, and BOP doesn't seem to be a big factor. I just hope that coming out of this race on Sunday, when that we can look back and BOP is not even a thought in our mind, that we're just
Yeah.
thinking about the great battles that we saw, and that all of that is put behind, and we're talking about the racing, because that's what we're here for. We're here to watch this incredible racing, and and we're in for what looks like is going to be a really good show.
I think also another thing that people often forget, or not forget, but it's very easy to blame balance of performance. But I'm going to use this as a great little segue to show some love to the LMP2 class. Because if you're looking at the... I don't have it pulled up right now, do I? Okay, yes, I do. If we're looking at the qualifying results from today in the Hyperpole session... That was a lie. I did not have it pulled up. Now I do. The LMP2 class gap from first to second place is 0.6 of a second.
Mm-hmm.
The top 4 in the Hypercar class are separated by 0.5 of a second, half a second. LMP2 is a spec class right now. Everybody's running the Orica 07. Everybody's running the Gibson V8 engine. So you need to realize that despite the fact that there is balance of performance at play in Hypercar and in LMGT3, there are way more factors at play than just the raw balance of the cars. Sure, it can get messed up sometimes, and there is a clear-cut favorite, and I think it's rightfully called out when that's evident. But at the end of the day, the gap in LMP2 where the cars were spec was larger than it was in the Hypercar class by quite a big margin. Mm-hmm. If you're just comparing the top 2. And like I said, there's no case to be made with balance of performance in LMP2. So let's still appreciate the drivers that are behind these cars and the teams that spend tens of thousands of kilometers testing these cars and fine-tuning the software in them and fine-tuning reliability and coming out with upgrades on the car to try to eke out more performance and make the cars more consistent from track to track, as we've seen Peugeot attempt to do with the 9X8, although hasn't quite paid out in their favor so far. Because there's so much more at play than just the balance of performance that we see. I'm going to be done. I'm done talking about BOP from this point on, but I rest my case.
I will only say one more thing. BOP, blaming bad results on BOP is not giving enough credit to the teams that had good pace and were going to have good pace regardless of what their BOP was. You mentioned like the teams do play an exceptionally large role in making sure that these cars can extract all the performance that they can. And it's not always that BOP that makes you that bit quicker. If you nail on a setup, you nail on what your team is doing for the week, then that is a huge difference maker. And yeah, it's not all about BOP.
Yeah. Take a look at, again, watch the onboard of Kevin Escher's pole lap today.
Yeah.
Where he was about 2 millimeters from being outside of track limits in the final turn.
Yeah.
On that pole lap, and then come back and tell me that car is only on pole because of balance of performance. Now I rest my case. I do want to discuss a couple more things that we've seen this week from the practice sessions and the qualifying sessions as well. Jota Sport is currently, probably as we speak right now, despite the fact that it would be 2:51. Nearly 3 in the morning over in Le Mans, France, preparing a new monocoque 963 to replace the one that Callum Ilott damaged in free practice 2, the end of free practice 2 last night. That car had a crash in the Forest Esses, which admittedly didn't look that heavy to me. It didn't look like a crash that would be large enough or heavy enough to tub an entire car, especially with I'm pretty sure Durrani at Sebring, when that car flipped pretty violently, I'm pretty sure they were able to repair that car. So when you compare the two of them, I know he had a tire barrier and Callum didn't, to my knowledge. Regardless, let's put all that aside. They are preparing that new car. They are planning on doing a shakedown session with that car tomorrow, not at the track, as the track will be open to the public tomorrow. So if by chance you are in Le Mans or near Le Mans listening to this podcast, one of the favorite things I did last year, one of my favorite things, was doing a walk around the track on the Friday afternoon It's completely open to the public. There's no traffic at all. You can go walk in the middle of the Mulsanne Straight. You can go walk in the middle of Indianapolis Turn, and just enjoy the 8 or so hours that they leave that track open. It is coinciding with the parade in the city center. So you sort of have to pick one or the other, but I went for the one with a lot less people. I I got sidetracked again because the track will have people walking on it tomorrow. So they'll be shaking down that car at the airport, which is right adjacent to the track. I guess just giving it a couple runs down the runway to make sure that car ticks all the boxes before it gets its first running on track in the 15-minute warm-up session on Saturday. So a lot of pressure for that team. They did make it into the Hyperpole session, but now building an entirely new car. They'll be starting 8th place in the race with a car that is raced driven for a maximum of 15 minutes, give or take, in the warm-up session on Saturday.
Yeah, they'll have done a grocery store trip with that car, and that will be the extent of the mileage on it.
And I don't want to, not discredit, but I want to emphasize how much of a task that is for that team. There's actually a quote here from Dieter Gass, who's the Hertz Team Jota team principal, that I just want to read off. Saying, as part of the process of preparing the number 12 car for the race, we've now been granted permission to shake down in the nearby airfield on Friday evening. The replacement monocoque has arrived. They sourced that from, I believe, the factory Penske team. So we have just over 24 hours to build up our car, a job which normally takes 3 weeks.
Yep.
Another big challenge for everybody, particularly our incredible mechanics, but we have full confidence that they will pull off yet another miracle. Really says everything that needs to be said there, but preparing that car from scratch in about 24 hours, a little bit over, before it needs to be ready to hit the track on tomorrow evening. So going back to trying to think, let's look at the chat, because it's been a couple minutes since I looked at some of the questions over here.
If anybody has any questions, or even your predictions for the race, then and you're listening to this live, then let us know in the chat.
Let's get into our predictions now. How about? Because this is going to be interesting for me. I wanted to put out our prediction graphics before the race, as I usually do, or not before the race, before the episode, as I usually would do. But I've just been busy doing other video stuff today, so I didn't get around to it. We did both slack a little bit and wait until after qualifying to get our predictions. And although I'll give you credit, you put yours in before the Hyperpole session, and I just want to give you a chance to defend yourself right now, I guess, before I discuss what I've got going on here.
So I honestly, we'll start with the LMH predictions, because why not? I kind of had, this is the car. I knew I was going to pick these guys before they even took to the track this week. Maybe I'll admit, it's probably some IMSA bias coming through, and there's probably some IMSA bias from a couple of my picks, but I think the 311 Cadillac, that's the red Cadillac, they didn't make it through to Hyperpole, and but the Cadillacs have looked really strong this week. I kind of expected that the Cadillacs were gonna be strong. It seems like a track that should suit them. And I gotta pick the 311 because of all the bad luck that they've had this year. We've joked about it a couple times earlier in this year, and all the bad luck that they've had stateside. They're bound to turn it around at some point, and what better way for them to pick up their first win of the season than at Le Mans? So I got to go with 311.
After a disastrous start of the race last year,
that's true.
Yeah, they didn't really get a chance to show their worth last year with that unfortunate accident on lap 1 by Jack Aiken in the first chicane. Yep.
Is he starting the race this year?
I'm not sure, but I would also imagine that the track's gonna maybe be dry.
Yeah, it was
start
wet
of the race
last
this year,
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially on the Mulsanne Straight.
Yes.
And they were on slick tires, which didn't help. Cold
True.
slicks. Well, no, not
No,
entirely cold slicks because they
they had the
had
warmers.
tire warmers, but they also did a full pace lap at that point, which
True.
takes about 8 minutes at Le Mans. So all right, this is the part of the episode where I'm going to tell everybody that I actually haven't put enough effort into think of picks yet. So
Oh
we're going to do it
no.
on the fly. We're going to do it live. I have thought of a hypercar one though. Watching practice this week and just knowing what that team is capable of, and I hinted at this earlier. I've got in the background there. That is a. I'm not pointing with it right. That is a Toyota Gazoo Racing flag that has been in the background of every podcast episode since we rebooted this thing. And I proudly waved that flag standing under the podium last year at Le Mans for two reasons. Number one, they gave it to me and it was free. Number two, I have a lot of respect, and I'm not necessarily a Toyota fan, but I have a lot of respect for their fighting spirit. And looking at last year's race, where yes, they were involved in the wrong side of some politics before the race and probably should have been a bit more competitive than they actually were. They didn't give up the fight, and that was very evident seeing Rio Hirakawa in the number 8 car pushing that car ultimately a little bit too much and spinning the car on the exit of Indianapolis going into Arnage with a couple hours left in the race. Had it not been for that, and with the issue that the 51 Ferrari had in the pit lane with about a half hour to go, they really would have been in the fight for that race. And because of that, I think that they're going to be a strong favorite for this year. They've topped 3 of the practice sessions this week, 3 of the 4 practice sessions. They're starting 11th, which is not the big thing for them, and for anybody starting mid-pack is going to be surviving turn 1. If you can survive turn 1, survive that first lap, the race is really in anybody's hands at that point. It doesn't matter if you're starting 23rd in the hypercar class, which their sister number 7 car is. As long as you have enough pace in the race itself, it's not really going to make any difference at all. So I'm going to go with the number 8 car. I think they have a lot to prove from last year. They fell a little bit short last year. They have a ton of success. That team, that specific car, has a ton of success here at Le Mans. And the one thing they have, we talk about these new teams that are coming into the race this year in the hypercar class, new manufacturers. The one thing Toyota has more than anybody else there is experience. And experience really pays dividends at a 24-hour race. Ferrari last year got that win, but of course it wasn't a completely new team. It was AF Corsa, who had already won in the GTE Pro class multiple times at that point. Had been a Ferrari factory team for a decade at that point. So when I look at some of the new teams that are coming into the class, I look at some of the lack of experience that they have compared to Toyota. Toyota's got the most seasoned car on the grid. I would like to imagine that the reliability on that car will be pretty strong. So that's the one I'm going to go with. Specifically the 8 car, though. How about LMP2?
LMP2. Oh, man. The LMP2 class is going to be another good one to watch. But for me here, it's such a tough class to choose from. We've seen some, some great pace. There's so many good drivers. We see not necessarily even hypercar drivers, but GTP drivers from IMSA. Some of them are coming over and competing in this class. Felipe Albuquerque, etc. There are so many strong entries here to talk about, but for me, one of them really stuck out to me, and that is the number 45 CrowdStrike Racing by APR entry. The lineup there is George Kurtz, Colin Braun, and I lost it, Nicky Katzberg.
Yep.
So, it's hard to find a lineup in this class that isn't strong. I love that lineup there. I think we have 3 really strong drivers that are coming into this with a strong team. I like everything about this entry, and I'm picking them to take this one. I also is I don't. This one is not the IMSA invite. The IMSA invite, I think, might be one of the United cars.
Yeah, the
23.
23. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think Keating got that entry or that
Yeah.
invite.
Yeah, well, CrowdStrike races in the Asian Le Mans series as well, do they not?
Yeah, I think this car may have come from the Asian Le Mans series, but they also, I think, got an ELMS invite as well. There was, they got a lot of invites. I think they have, how many cars does APR have on the grid? Is it just two? I don't know.
Yeah, two. It would be the 45 and the 25.
Yeah. Okay. But there's a lot of strong entries in this class, but that 45 stuck out to me.
Yeah. Well, okay, so you say I've noticed a trend here. I've noticed we're sort of 2 for 2 on IMSA cars, and you mentioned that yourself. But I'm going to give credit to you. They're not a bad car to pick. If you look specifically at the qualifying results from what we saw today, okay, Porsche Penske Motorsport number 6 car, that is a full season WEC entry. But some of those drivers having experience in the IMSA endurance races, obviously Porsche Penske being the most successful team over in IMSA this year in the GTP class. You look at who's on pole in LMP2, it's the AO by TF Sport car. AO Racing, obviously a staple over in the IMSA category. That car coming over from IMSA as well,
Spike.
with some of the drivers from IMSA as well. And then you look at Inception Racing on pole in LMGT3. It's sort of an IMSA. I'm not going to say complete IMSA pole sweep because of the exception of the hypercar class, but there's definitely a lot of IMSA lineage with a lot of those entries. And I wouldn't blame you for going down that route, even though it's pretty convenient for you.
It is very convenient.
For myself,
Just throw a dart. Throw a dart.
Well, that's what it is at the end of the day with LMP2. You're not looking at which cars have more pace than the others. I like the number 37 Cool Racing car. I mean, you have Malth Jakobsen, Peugeot reserve driver, probably should have gotten the call up the last race out, but ultimately didn't. You have Ritomo Miata, probably somebody that we'll see in Toyota's hypercar future as well. They were fastest in the free practice 2 session. They've been, pretty decently paced all week. Also looking at the free practice 3 session, they were second. So they're the dart I'm going to throw on the board. I like the consistency we've seen out of that car so far this week. Going to go with them.
Like I said, you can't go wrong, I feel like, with lots of these LMP2 picks. There is so many strong ones here.
I mean, you can't sleep on Ben Keating either. He seems to find a lot of success at Le Mans no matter what he's driving. So, in this year, he's in that United Autosport LMP2 car.
Yeah, with Felipe Albuquerque and Ben Hanley.
Oh, yeah.
That's a pretty strong lineup there, too.
Which is ironic because that car is listed as a Pro-Am LMP2 car. I'm gonna rant again. This podcast is where I can voice my concerns with things in sports car racing, but I've said it before. Why do we have a Pro-Am subclass in a Pro-Am class in 2024 when most of the like pro drivers are up in the hypercar category at this point? I can kind of understand if it was 2020 when LMP2 was really the star of the show, along with GTD Pro or GTE Pro. did it again. But yeah, that's all I got to say about that. Pro-Am though, with that lineup of Ben Keating, Albuquerque, and Ben Hanley. You tell me.
Yeah. And I guess that leaves us with LMGT3, right?
Oh yeah.
And I mean, I feel like we sound like broken records at this point, that we're talking about how close and how you can it's kind of a toss-up in all 3 of the classes. It is very much a toss-up as well in the LMGT3 class. But one of the cars that has shown glimpses of pace last year and glimpses of pace again this year, arguably they should have won Spa, but they didn't have everything go their way, whether it was a miscalculation of fuel. Well, it definitely was a miscalculation of fuel mileage, but also maybe a strategic mistake to not try and save some fuel earlier in that stint. The number 60 Iron Lynx Lamborghini. I'm probably going to butcher the name, so I'm not going to attempt it. But this is again an entry full, a stacked entry in this class. Lamborghinis looked quick so far this year. They're one of many cars that have shown good pace so far this week. They were in Hyperpole today. Give me the number 60 Iron Lynx Lamborghini in LMGT3.
Fair pick. When you were going over your LMP2 pick, I was looking down the list and thinking of who would be a good pick there. When you were going over LMGT3, I was admittedly looking at the chat, seeing if there were some questions for me to catch up on. So now I'm completely on the spot.
Well, wait, I can try and pronounce the names for the 60.
If you want to give me 10 seconds, we can go ahead.
Claudio Schiavone.
You got it.
It's close. Is it Matteo Cressoni?
Yep. Yeah.
Perfect. And then Frank Pereira. Easy peasy lemon squeezy.
I don't know if Pereira has I believe he's German. I don't know if it's Frank Pereira, but I'll give it to you.
We're rolling with that. You can send any complaints to GT Rain here. He'll deal with them.
Spam the chat. Tell us we're wrong. Oh man, it's such a mixed bag in GT3. As we said, it's hard to pick a favorite.
Aston Martins look good.
You know what? You beat me to it, but I was going to say my safe pick in IMSA all the time is just the 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin.
That hasn't worked out well this year, so.
Well, that's the thing, is they're either very decent or something happened and they're not even close.
That's also a new car as well.
Yeah. So coming over from or not coming over from IMSA, that's actually a full season car in the World Endurance Championship this year. I don't know. I'm just looking down the practice results. They've looked decently strong all week. I like the driver lineup in that car.
Yeah. I
would like if my phone stopped going off when I'm doing a podcast.
See, everybody's sending you the emails, though.
Oh, yeah. So I'm just going to say the 27 car. I don't have a whole lot else to add on top of that, mainly because I came up with that pick 10 seconds ago. But we'll see. Maybe not putting a lot of thought in the predictions is the way to go. And if this pays off for me, this is my new strategy.
It clearly hasn't worked out for us when we put a lot of thought into it. So
no.
What's the worst that could happen?
And also, as I said earlier, it seems like none of my prototype picks end up actually being correct. I have had a couple GT ones correct before. So Toyota, I apologize in advance for cursing the 8 car this year. I also ask you before every single race we do predictions to give me a bonus pick. And here you have 24 hours of action to try to think of something unique and interesting that might happen. What do you got on your mind?
Well, the bonus pick, it was certainly made a lot easier in my mind seeing what the pace that this car has posted so far this week. I don't think this is too crazy or too big of a stretch, but I'm calling for BMW in the hypercar class to be on the podium. The pace that they've shown has been great. That car has certainly looked strong, and this could be sort of a real BMW, hypercar coming out party. Not to mention, they don't have a podium in IMSA or the WEC yet this year in the top class of prototypes. So give me the BMW in hypercar on the podium.
Yeah, and they haven't had a lot of success, period, with that car across both programs. I've especially talked about in IMSA how that's like the one GTP car that has yet to get an on-track victory. They won that technicality race last year at Watkins Glen after the Porsche got disqualified. But if that's where WRT gets their first podium, or maybe if they get their first win with that car, that would be a huge story. You know what? Things seem to happen in sports car racing sometimes, be it coincidence or not, that on the particular anniversary of previous wins, a manufacturer will just do it again just for the good story. Um, Ford did that in 16, winning in GT 50 years after the GT40 won in 66. It's been 25 years since BMW last won their first 24 Hours of Le Mans, so who knows? Interesting one, though. We'll see if they can hold up the entire 24 hours. I did get a chance to put a little bit of thought into this one before the episode.
Well, good.
We have two cars in the WEC that have a big points gap to the car in second place. The first one is in Hypercar, the number 6 Porsche, holding a pretty significant gap over second. And then the other one is in LMGT3, the number 92 Porsche, holding a massive gap over second place in that class after the first 3 races we've seen. I have a sneak feeling that one of those two cars is going to not finish in the points at Le Mans. I don't know which one, but let's remember that Le Mans is a double points race. So if that does happen, it'll be a great thing for everybody else in that class because they desperately need to claw in some points somewhere to both the number 6 and the number 92 cars. Both of them Porsches. Number 6 car starting on pole, number 92 car starting in second. So they have the pace to win. I would like to imagine both of those cars do. But it's a 24-hour race, and crazy things can happen, whether it's reliability or a crash. So we'll see if that ends up coming true. There was a great question I saw in the chat a few minutes ago that I want to get to. And I scrolled so far up in the chat that I lost it. It was essentially, what's the best way to I think I found the question. As a new friend learning the ropes of the WEC, how should I approach watching and analyzing these races? And I think that's a really good question that I have never answered personally. But 24-hour races are very unique in the fact that you'll watch, in my case, you'll try to watch the entire race just because I love that race. And I wouldn't want to be caught dead missing a minute of it. Usually I'll fall asleep at some point, and that'll happen regardless. But the important thing is you can't stay glued to the screen the entire time. It's especially if you're coming in from a more sprint-oriented form of racing, whether that's F1, where the races are generally like 90 minutes. IndyCar races are a little bit longer than that, but same point.
Heck, even if you're just used to watching the regular WEC races, this is a marathon.
Yeah, a 6-hour race. You have to just look. You have to find other things to keep yourself occupied during the race, especially in the overnight hours when you're really tired. If you're still trying to pay attention to the race, there's no shame in going to sleep, first of all.
Yes.
Especially if you're at the race. I think that's true. Last year, I slept more in the 24 hours than I ever have since 2016 when I fell asleep accidentally. But last year I was just in a car in a parking lot at the track, and I slept through my alarm. So the 2-hour nap turned into like 5 or 6. And I got really scared, by the way, when I woke up and it was daylight out, and I was like, I hope I can hear cars right now, because if I don't hear cars, it's not going to be great. And it's like, that feeling when you wake up and you like realize that your alarm didn't go off, and you're like, what time is it? What? Or you remember that you forgot to set an alarm and you have some important thing in the morning. That's what that felt like to me.
Panic.
Yeah, just immediate. And I check my watch. Oh, okay. It's 7:30. We're good. So don't feel like you have to watch the entire 24-hour race. They generally try to do a pretty good job at doing highlights at intervals throughout the race anyways. So if you do miss segments of it, there's going to be very frequent highlight things that show the major events that you would have missed out on. But if you're trying to watch as much of it as possible, just try to find other things to keep yourself occupied. Whether that's like dusting off a shelf or doing something.
Yeah, dust off your shelf at 3 a.m. It'll keep you awake. Don't worry.
Yeah. But that's my basic answer. It sounds silly, but I've watched dozens of 24-hour races at this point. And the interesting thing I've noticed is that it's easier to stay awake in person at a 24-hour race than it is watching at home. And that's the other thing. If you're trying to stay up the entire 24 hours, don't get comfortable when you're tired. You have to
Yeah.
find ways to stay uncomfortable, which sounds weird, but true.
Some of the other things, if you are trying to stay awake for all 24 hours, is stay hydrated. Like you got to look after yourself here. Your body's going to be getting put through the ringer if you're trying to stay up for 24 hours. So, stay hydrated, try and drink lots of water. If you can, look after what you're eating. Yeah, there you go. Water. Try and eat relatively healthy if you can. Have snacks kicking around. Have a granola bar. Have whatever your snack of choice is, like kicking around, so you can munch on something. But if you expect to stay up for 24 hours after eating a bucket of fried chicken and you had 10 beers watching the first half of the race, then my prediction for that is that you're probably going to fall asleep for a bit. So you got to look after yourself. And like you said, try and having other things to do as well is going to help. And you know what, if you need a nap, if we do get a full course yellow or something where the safety car has to come out in this race, then it's going to be out for a while here. So you could always grab a few minutes of shut eye during that if you really need to.
Sometimes barrier repairs are your friend. Don't forget that either. So.
Yeah. We saw a significant barrier repair today.
Yeah. And if that happened during the race, easy hour-long safety car.
Yeah.
So, DK Media, good friend Drayton in the chat asking here, is this the year more than 2 cars finish on the lead lap? And that brings up a very interesting stat that I didn't know. Kudos to Tim Fulbrook over at Only Endurance for posting that earlier in the week. Yes, that's true. In the entire 100-year history of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, 4 overall ranks, not in class, there have never been more than 2 cars finishing on the lead lap of the race, which really surprised me because there's been quite a few finishes that were pretty close at Le Mans, given the fact that it is a 24-hour race. Last year was pretty close in the final hours. 2011 was pretty close. 1966 was very close. There was a year in the Group C era as well. I want to say it was 86, I think, was pretty close. But evidently, never more than 2 cars finishing on the lead lap. And we've talked all episode about how competitive the field is in the hypercar class this year and how difficult it is for us to predict which manufacturer is really going to have that advantage in the race. I think we're going to see throughout the race different cars having advantages at different segments. That's another big thing with 24-hour races, and especially races that end up in the rain, is some cars have advantages in different areas. We saw that last year with the 9X8. It was very competitive in the rain, so every time the track got wet, they managed to pull out like 3 seconds a lap and just start pulling away a lead. And then when the track would dry up, that lead would decrease. Some cars are better at night than they are during the day. So this is the 5th question I've taken way too long to answer, but I'm hoping it is. I'm hoping that the hype we've built up for this race and everything that we've said so far holds true, and that we have a very competitive race where we finally break that trend of no more than 2 cars finishing on the lead lap.
I hope so. I hope so. If there's a year that this is the year, this is the year.
Will the 24 Hours of Le Mans last 24 hours unlike the Nürburgring? I sort of touched on this earlier, but yes, I would hope so. I really hope so. If it doesn't, then if we have the Le Mans 8 hours, the next podcast episode is going to be the most upset you've ever seen me be on a podcast. I promise you that right now. But weather's usually not as big of an issue here as it is at the Nürburgring, like we said earlier. And in the 100-year history of the race, as I also said earlier, there's never been a red flag. So I'm hoping that all holds true this year.
To the timing question, or the 8 hours question, we've had the Rolex 2358, We've had there was the Nürburgring, and wasn't there one more where we
The
had?
Spa of WC
Oh
went over
yes,
an hour 44.
yeah, you're right. Yeah, so we don't have a good track record on these timed races so far this year. Hopefully that trend, yeah, doesn't continue, unless if we get like the 24 hour in like 5 minutes, of Le Mans. Although I kind of doubt that would happen, but
Give
you
it a
know,
really slow cool down lap. Could have
yeah,
happened.
yeah, that's true. Oh
Um,
no, no, wait, no. How it works is the leader runs out of fuel or something. They have like a lap lead. They run out of fuel halfway through the final lap, and they're just limping it around, and the lap takes forever, and then we're going over 24 hours. That's how it happens.
yeah. Well, actually, it's funny you mentioned. Well, not really funny because this is rather tragic if it happens. But if a car takes the last lap and then for whatever reason doesn't finish
Oh
within
yeah.
a certain time window, this has happened twice in recent memory. It happened in 2016, obviously, with Toyota, one of the most iconic moments of Le Mans history, with that breakdown on the final lap of the race. They crossed the line, and then I don't know how long they get to finish that last lap. It's not a it's not an exuberant amount of time though, because they ended up being disqualified from the race for not really disqualified, but they weren't classified in the race because it took them too long to finish that last lap. If they had stopped right before the finish line and then didn't get going again, they would have been fine. They would have finished a lap down. But that also happened in 2021, 2? Was it? It was 1. Was it 22? It
Flame
was
Runner.
21. It was
Flame
21.
Runner saying with 21. Yeah.
Yeah, with the WRT LMP2 car. Forgetting which number, but it was the one that Robert Kubica was in. Breaking or running out of fuel on the last lap. I can't remember what happened to that car, but similar situation there as well. So keep that in mind if anything
Yeah.
happens like that this year. Hopefully not.
Maybe I shouldn't
Uh,
have spoken into existence. So
yeah, yeah. Maybe I just because nothing I say ends up happening. So I think I just cleared it up.
that's true. We're in the clear now.
Yeah. Um, Looking through the chat if there's any other questions. If you have any other questions that you want to ask us before Le Mans, now would be a great time to ask those as we do start to wrap up the episode here. But I do want to say, as an aside, if this is your first time watching the 24 Hours of Le Mans, first of all, you're very lucky because
Mhm.
I think what we're going to see this year, and this is me pressing more hype into this race again, that hopefully I'm writing checks that I can actually cash here. But I think this is going to be one of the years that we remember for a long time. I certainly hope so. Everything we've seen this week has led me to believe that we're going to see a very competitive race in all three classes. And it hasn't always been that way. Coming from somebody who's watched every Le Mans since 2011, I know there are people in the chat who have watched way longer than I have. There were years where we would go into the race and say, okay, one of the Toyotas is going to win. Which one is going to win? Or Audi back in the privateer, when Audi was basically the only factory team running up against a bunch of smaller, I guess as we now know them, boutique manufacturers. They were really a shoo-in to win those races as well. What we have now is something that even people like you and I, Stu, who like to regard ourselves as pretty knowledgeable in the sports car racing sector, or at least we would imagine we are,
Yeah.
um, have no idea what we're going to see this weekend. And to me, that's the best case scenario going into this weekend. Is there's a reason for me to keep my eyes open all 24 hours. I'll be hopefully making this the year that I actually can stay awake the entire 24 hours, because I just don't know what's going to happen, and I don't want to miss a single moment of the race.
Yeah. It's going to be a fun one to watch this year. We got some funny comments here coming in. What kind of toothpaste do you use? Honestly, I've heard.
Colgate.
Yeah, I'm a Crest. It was the pack
I'll
was on
vary
sale.
it. I'll switch.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
true. Whatever's on sale is what I'm grabbing. So, but Kedema, I think. You joke with the toothpaste question, and tying that back into things to do to stay awake. I have heard of people who are at the track for 24-hour races. I think I saw this from Mark Urban, a
Yeah.
videographer. He posts good stuff all over social media. But
Go follow
I
Mark.
think he said that one of the tricks that he uses to stay awake is he'll brush his teeth multiple times during the race. Like every 8 to 10 hours or so. It really helps you feel refreshed. And because you kind of associate that with, you get up in the morning, you brush your teeth.
Yeah.
It can really help you feel refreshed. So simple things like that can really help get you through this race.
I cannot believe you really segued a question about toothpaste, but bravo! I'll give you credit for that. There's that, and then there's also the clean socks theory, where if you are at the race and you're struggling to stay awake, if you got a fresh pair of socks in your backpack or in a tent if you're camping, throw them on, because apparently this gives you a new bout of energy that I haven't been able to experiment with yet. So, but from people more experienced than me, there you go. Couple questions here. So I think forecasting storms for the race. Just to touch on what I said earlier, it looks like it will be raining on Sunday. Whether or not it's actually raining during the finish of the race, not too sure yet. But I would imagine at some point throughout the race, yes, we'll probably see rain. Hopefully not too significant to the point where they would have to throw that first red flag. And hopefully for the sake of fans, there's no lightning in the area as well, because that's the real enemy with these races. It's not so much the rain, it's the lightning in the area.
Yep.
Will you be doing a live stream companion, just like a live stream watch along, I assume you're asking? I will not be during the 24 hours this year. I contemplated doing one during some of the overnight hours. But to be honest with you, I want to just take the race this year and just properly enjoy it. I don't want to be on camera. I just want to sit there, talk about the race overnight with some friends, and try to have as much of a good time as I can with all of it. So I will not be doing it during the race. Stu, I don't want to speak on your behalf, but it seems like you usually do a lot of IMSA watch-alongs. So wouldn't imagine you have anything planned.
No, nothing planned for me. Like you, I want to take in the race as much as I can, and I need all the time that I can get this weekend, because I have some packing to do ahead of the 6 hours of the Glen next week. I'll be camping trackside, so I got to get the camping gear ready.
There we go. Sounds good. You guys in here got any Discord servers watching the race together? So I have a channel Discord, which admittedly I need to use a lot more than I actually do. I'll be just hanging out there. If you want to chat with me during the race and you want to do it in a live setting, where it's not just you tweeting at me, you can go to that. It hopefully is linked in the description of this podcast if you're watching on YouTube. If not, just click on the channel. I know it's in the channel links at the banner in the top. If that link doesn't work, well, I'll just check it after the episode to make sure it works, because it's a few years old at this point. But you can ask me some questions during the race there, and I'll try to check that throughout the race myself.
It is there on your channel.
Does it still work?
Yeah, it does. It took me
Perfect.
right to GT Rain's basement. So
Perfect.
I don't know if I like being locked down here, but
yeah.
Another good one another couple of good ones that there's lots of like-minded individuals, and I know they usually host some sort of voice chat is basically going on all the time, is the r-wec Discord.
Yep.
You can find that on the Reddit page, and then also I think Radio Le Mans has a Discord server as well. It's not as big as the WRC. What is it? It's the Midweek Motorsports Listeners Collective. That you can, I think they have that linked out somewhere there. So there's some good options, pretty well anywhere. You can chat with some like-minded fans.
Yeah, I'll vouch for the r/WC one. If I'm not chatting in there, I am at least going in there every time a big moment happens to see what some people are thinking about it. So I'm in there quite frequently during the race. You might find me there as well, just chatting away in the chat. Sam Kegel, how many times have you been to the Le Mans 24 Hours? I've been once. I went last year. Would have loved to have gone again this year, but I need to be financially responsible and not let myself go to France every single year. That being said, I am planning on going back again next year. So it's in the works. We'll see. Hopefully that ends up coming to fruition.
I've got to make it over there at some point.
Oh, for sure.
I've got to get that sorted.
If you're, this is not specifically to you, Stu. This is to anybody listening. If you are interested in sports car racing, now is the time to go over to the 24 Hours of Le Mans. We're seeing so many manufacturers in the race right now in the top class, and I promise you, give it 10 years time and we won't have the same thing. Yeah. I don't say that to be a pessimist. I say that because generally speaking, sports car racing has the highest of highs and then followed by the lowest of lows. We see this multiple times. It seems like a class really loses all of its manufacturers just as quickly as it gained them. So I would say don't sit on it. If this is something you have interest in, start saving up your pennies. Try to go over there because from somebody who went last year, it is still the most thrilled I was to be at a race in my life, and it's just a big reason why I want to go back next year. But even if you're not able to make it over to that race, just being a fan right now is one of the best times to be a fan as well, watching at home. Got a lot of things coming in, so I'm just trying to make sure I don't miss on anything big here. I'll be on Twitter arguing with fans. You know what? There will be plenty of arguing to be had there. I'll give you that. The commentators are really talented to keep conversations going when nothing is happening. Yes, if you tune in, particularly to the overnight hours, I like to call it the graveyard shift. The World Feed, Graham Goodwin, and Martin Haven and Anthony Davidson generally start to go off the rails a little bit in the overnight hours and start talking about random things, whether it be cake or drugs I'm not going to mention on this podcast. But there's plenty of banter to be heard there. So try to enjoy the overnight hours if you can. But then also Radio Le Mans as well. If you have not listened to a Radio Le Mans broadcast, if you watch IMSA and you're used to the World Feed and IMSA, you have basically the same crew over there this year. Shea Adam, unfortunately, won't be there as a pit reporter at Le Mans this year. But the base crew is there. You have John Hindhaugh, Johnny Palmer, just completely fantastic people that are great to listen to, whether you're at the track or at home. So try to take advantage of that as well. I think I'm going to call it that, an episode for our Le Mans preview. Like I said, I really took this one off the cuff a lot, but I'm really glad that I did. We had a great amount of people tuning into this episode. Really great to talk about sports car racing with some of you in the chat. We will be back? ? Stu, are we back next Tuesday? You're not off to Watkins Glen already? Okay.
No, I'll be off early on Wednesday morning. So
cool. You're doing the podcast to immediately go to sleep and then immediately start driving. We're going to have a ton to review next week's episode, so it's probably going to be a bit of a long one. We'll be previewing the IMSA 6 hours at the Glen, which is another race that we're both looking forward to as well. And I hope to catch you all there. So for tonight, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning into this show. Hope to catch you next week. And most importantly, enjoy the 24 Hours of Le Mans this weekend. Hope to see you next week. Take care.